In 1962, a Nobel Prize is awarded to James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins for their groundbreaking work on DNA. It is one of the greatest achievements in the history of science, often described as the key to unlocking the secret of life. A few years later, James Watson publishes his personal account of the discovery. In the Double Helix, this slim, best-selling book, he depicts a race to determine the structure of DNA and introduces a little-known scientist named Rosalind Franklin. Rosalind Franklin was born in London in 1920. From an early age, Rosalind stands out. She enjoys memory games, and an aunt writes, "Rosalind is alarmingly clever. She spends all her time doing arithmetic for pleasure, and invariably gets her sums right." Her parents send her to St. Paul's Girls' School, which, despite its name, had no church affiliation. What it did have was a strong tradition of preparing girls for a career. Rosalind is anxious to do something useful with her life. She finishes a year early at St. Paul's and wins a scholarship to study physics and chemistry at Cambridge University. Franklin is offered a position at King's College in London, a highly prestigious research center. Rosalind Franklin is 30 years old as she unwittingly enters an undeclared race to unravel the secret of life. Franklin quickly adjusted to the physical limitations of the lab, but not to the segregated boys' club culture of King's College. To make matters worse, there was confusion over who was in charge, Franklin or Maurice Wilkins. At the time of her arrival, Wilkins was on holiday. While he was gone, his PhD student Raymond Gosling was put under Franklin's supervision. When Wilkins returned, he walked into a vastly improved lab, but it wasn't his anymore. He lost his lab and his PhD student, and Rosalind Franklin, whom he thought was going to be his assistant, turned out to be better trained and already working independently.
She had the notion that this was her project. He had the notion it was his project, and if anything, she should help him in his effort to solve the structure. And so this is a recipe for disaster.
The times and their personalities worked against an effective partnership.
This was a time when it was very, very hard for women in science to be taken seriously, and so I would imagine that Rosalind Franklin had to be perhaps quite assertive.
Despite all the tensions of the lab, Franklin applied herself to the task with single-minded determination, setting her sights on solving the structure of DNA. But now, a new player was about to enter the game.
While Rosalind was setting up her new lab at King's College London, James Watson, much younger, 23, but with a PhD, had come to Europe because he wanted to study the gene, and he was convinced that the gene was the thing to study. This is going to be the secret of life.
There, Watson is assigned an office with another physicist turned crystallographer, Francis Crick, an old friend of Wilkins. Crick and Watson immediately click.
Crick and Watson connected instantly when they met in 1951. They both loved to talk science.
They would constantly throw crazy ideas at each other, dismiss them, have another idea, follow that a little further, dismiss that, but then something comes out of left field, so it's kind of this give and take.
But an hour away at King's College, the negative atmosphere takes a new turn for the worse. Rosalind Franklin is given the sarcastic nickname that Watson will later popularize in the double helix, Rosie. Despite the hostile environment, within months of her arrival at King's, Franklin is producing amazing results. Franklin's discovery that there are two forms of DNA is perhaps the most crucial step toward the ultimate discovery of its structure. The A is a drier, more crystalline form of DNA and produces more detailed images. The B is wetter, and how DNA occurs in living cells. It produces a simpler image, but reveals a key clue to solving the structure of DNA. The X shape in the middle is the diffraction signature of a helix. The significance is not lost on Franklin. She notes it in scientific shorthand and, according to Klug, presents her discovery. In the audience that day is James Watson, sent by Crick to gather intelligence on Franklin's labors. Crick and Watson are planning to use a different approach to solving the structure of DNA: model building. Within a week, Watson and Crick invite the scientists from King's College to see their model.
So Rosalind just was terribly amused, and she never took prisoners anyway, so she was pretty sharp in her criticism of the model and explained in detail why it couldn't be correct. 1, 2, 3, and then we left.
The model of DNA touted by Watson and Crick is an embarrassing failure. Lawrence Bragg, the head of the Cavendish lab, is humiliated and forbids Watson and Crick to continue their model making. To Franklin, the incident is an affirmation of her training, that experimentation and patient analysis of the data will reveal the answer. But what Franklin may not know is that her unpublished findings will continue to make their way to Watson and Crick, and they are getting there through the deputy director of her own lab, Morris Wilkins.